manager at EPM. I think a lot of you probably work with us already, but for those of you who don't, we provide HR and payroll services to schools pretty much across the country. We've got a lot of schools in Peterborough, so I'm sure that we're sort of a familiar name to you. My presentation today is very briefly going to be on head teacher performance management and also how you can support your head teacher's well-being sort of throughout that process. Now, I'm sure a number of you are sort of seasoned pros at doing head teacher performance management, so hopefully this will be nothing too new to you, but I'm sure you can pick up some hints and tips. And those of you that this is possibly your first time, hopefully you'll go away with a few pointers and sort of have learned something from today. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so there are a number of sort of statutory frameworks that we do refer to when we talk about head teacher performance management. So those of you that are maintained schools, throughout the presentation, anything that is involved is a sort of statutory document that you do need to be referring to. Academies, you're free to determine how you run your head teacher performance management, but I know a number of you probably would still take guidance and advice from these documents, so they are really important ones just to probably be aware of. The guidance really underpins how you should manage your head teacher performance management. So if I just quickly talk you through the key documents, we've got the education regulations, which effectively set out the need to have a documented process for appraisal. So that document there kind of forms the basis of what we do with performance management. The second document, hopefully you are all aware of, the School Teachers Pay and Conditions document. Now that sets out the pay and the provisions that make up sort of a teacher's contract. So that's a really key document to be aware of. And then you've also got your own school appraisal policy, which will set out, hopefully, your internal process of how you manage performance management. We've also got up there the National Standards of Excellence for Head Teachers. That is not a statutory document, but it is a really good one for just determining really high performance, high standards for head teachers. So if you're not aware of it, perhaps one to take a look at. So first things first, when we talk about performance management, it's really important not to think of performance management as one thing that happens at one point in the year. Performance management is a cycle. It is there to be a supportive process to support your head teacher's development, to support your school development throughout the year. So when we talk about performance management, we are referring to the appraisal meeting that probably happens between July and December, whenever you do it within your calendar, but actually it is a process that should run throughout the year. For maintained schools, this meeting, your yearly appraisal meeting with head teachers, does need to happen by the 31st of December. If there are any pay increases as part of that, we obviously backdate those to September, but it is important that meeting takes place before that deadline. Whilst we would suggest that you do have the annual appraisal meeting, we believe that it's best practice to have at least one mid-year review throughout that year. And actually, if you can have more, then that's great. Because if there are concerns about performance, or there are things you want to pick up on, or even really good practice you want to talk about, why are you waiting, a whole year before you address those concerns? So actually, those mid-year reviews are really key points to sit down with your head teacher and with your panel of governors to actually discuss what went well, what's not going well, looking at the targets, are the targets still fit for purpose, are we heading towards them, are we on track? If we're not on track, why? Can we put anything in place to kind of get us back on track? So we've got a little cycle here, so it is really important to remember that it's a cycle and don't just wait until the next sort of September to suddenly go, oh, we need to do performance management for the head teacher. Obviously, there are a number of aims for your performance management cycle. Most importantly is to improve the education of pupils. However, amongst that, we obviously need to make sure we are implementing the school improvement plan to reflect on the head teacher's performance overall throughout the year, and also to set clear targets moving forward. So always have those at the back of your mind when you are working through head teacher performance management. With regards to the actual performance management meeting, there are a number of things to consider when you are planning for that. So obviously the governing body needs to delegate the responsibility of holding that performance management meeting to a panel of governors within the governing body. Now the guidance is that there needs to be 2 people that, as a minimum, to hold the meeting. However, we recommend best practices to have 3 for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if you have a tie-break situation where 2 governors don't agree, actually having a third person there makes that, solves that problem fairly quickly. Secondly, we don't recommend having sort of more than 3, because if there are appeals against a pay decision, for example, you do need to have other governors available to be able to then hear a pay appeal further down the line. So 3 is kind of the magic number, really, when it comes to those panels. We would recommend not having a staff governor on the head teacher pay panel for hopefully very obvious reasons. Obviously, just thinking how appropriate are those people that sit on that panel. Most of the time, your chair of governors is probably going to be on there because they probably have the most knowledge about the school, what's going on, what the head teacher's been doing throughout the year. So they're normally a key person. However, they don't have to be. There isn't guidance that says the chair of governors has to sit on that panel, but we generally find they do. A requirement for a maintained school is to have an independent external advisor. So I'm sure most of you have got somebody that you probably already engaged their services for. There are no specific requirements as to who the advisor should be, but up here are some key things that you should take into account when determining who that advisor is. So, are they appropriately skilled? Do they have the knowledge? Are they able to analyse sort of the information, quickly produce the reports, that kind of stuff? But actually, what I think is also really important is, are they able to produce you, to give you as governors appropriate or confidence to be able to challenge the head teacher on various aspects, and also to be able to support the head teacher where they may need support in areas. So actually, is that advisor able to help you as governors to kind of fulfil your duties to do that? And that's a really important thing. Appropriate people that could be an education advisor. Often we have perhaps retired head teachers who haven't been associated with the school, perhaps school improvement partners that don't work within your local authority, that work within a different local authority. Education advisors, that kind of thing. But obviously have a good think about who's appropriate. Your head teacher could recommend who they think would be good, but actually it is a responsibility of the governors to find that person and to make that determination as to who that external advisor should be. So with regards to the actual annual appraisal meeting, it tends to fall into 2 parts. So the first part is the looking backwards, looking back at the year, looking at the targets that were set and looking at have they been met. If they have been met, great. If they haven't been met or they've only been partially met, is there a reason why? Are there any mitigating circumstances that have meant your head teacher hasn't been able to fulfil, the targets that were set? Have there been changes in the school? What's happened to stop them actually reaching their goal? And kind of considering all of those areas. If you have had concerns about the head teacher's performance and they are then picked up in that meeting, what we would suggest you do is get in contact with your HR provider. So if it is EPM, pick up the phone and speak to us and actually look at how's the most appropriate way to move that forward. The second part of the meeting is obviously agreeing head teacher's objectives and targets moving forward. Normally the head themselves would probably recommend sort of 3 or 4 targets or areas where they think that it needs to be addressed, taking into consideration what are the school's priorities, what are the things the school need to achieve for the next year, and actually thinking about those key areas. However, what you also might want to consider as a governing body is, are there any particular areas that you think your head teacher could do sort of some personal development in, some professional development, and actually using that as an opportunity to set targets on their own, their personal and professional development, really. So focusing on those areas as well, not just what does the school need, what are the results look like, etc. Actually sort of targeting particular areas as a supportive measure. A written report does need to be produced for maintained schools. That's in the regulations as well, so there does need to be a report produced off the back of that meeting, which your external advisor will help you put together. Well, we'll probably put together for you with, sharing with the head teacher and yourselves, just to make sure there's a final document there. So all of that should be completed by the end of this year. So probably a really good time to start thinking about when you're going to do those meetings, who's sitting on those meetings and what they look like. So sort of switching really into how does wellbeing and the head teacher's wellbeing play a part in that performance management cycle, because that can be quite a stressful thing to go through, having your performance scrutinised. There are some statutory obligations on any employer that we do need to consider when we are looking at wellbeing of our employees. The first one being working time regulations. So for those of you that aren't familiar with this document, it sets out statutory requirements for things like rest breaks, working weeks, working hours, breaks sort of in the working day and breaks between shifts. And I'll get on to a little bit why that piece of information is really, really key. The second piece there is the Health and Safety at Work Act, which basically says in it the employer has a duty to try and prevent stress-related illnesses for their staff. So that's a really key thing to sort of bear in mind. And then more specifically, the School Teachers Pay and Conditions document does actually have a particular paragraph that says it is the governing body's duty to have regard for the work-life balance of the head teacher. So it is really important that they all factor into your discussions around performance, around targets, and around your expectations of your head. And something that I think is really interesting is the Department for Education, their model appraisal and capability policy was renewed in 2019. They made some amendments to it earlier this year. In the previous version, there was absolutely no mention of workload whatsoever throughout the whole document. In the new version, they've added 6 references, and basically what those references say is the employer needs to have due regard to workload when carrying out the appraisal process. So they make references to things like classroom observations shouldn't be, put more workload on teachers, etc. All of that applies to your heads as well, about how this process should not increase their work life, increase their work basically. So it's really important to bear that in mind when you are going through that process. What are you asking your head to do? What are you asking them to prepare? And how is it affecting them as part of this appraisal process? There are a number of things that you can do as a governing body, or that you may want to take away as considerations as to how you can, as part of this appraisal process, have consideration for the work-life balance of a head teacher and actually consider their well-being and look at the areas where you think you might be able to help. There was a survey done, and forgive me, I can't remember who actually did it at this moment in time. It's in my notes somewhere. But they basically spoke to a whole load of head teachers and they said, what do you think would really help you? Sort of realistically, there are only so many things that we can do in education, but actually what would really help with your work-life balance and with your well-being? And some of the key areas that they spoke about was considering the time and length of governor meetings. So if you have got an agenda, sticking to it really, really clearly and being really clear about what the end time of that meeting is. If your head teacher has been in the building from 7 o'clock in the morning and they are there until your governing body meeting ends at, let's say, 9 p.m, that's a really long working day for them. The working time regulations state that there should be an 11-hour gap between when they finish work and when they start work again the next day. So if your governing body meeting finishes at 9 and they're back in the building at 7 o'clock the next day, you're in breach of those regulations. So it's really important to have regard for that. Also, little things like how far away from the school does your head live? So when the meeting finishes at 9 and you've got a 5-minute journey home, do they live 2 hours away? What time are they actually going to get home? Are you considering those things when you're planning your meetings, when you're planning how long they are, when you're setting your agenda? So a bit like today, when everything drags on an extra 5 minutes, 10 minutes, actually the impact on that one person's well-being who has been working really hard all day can be quite significant over a long period of time. So just having an awareness of that and doing your best as governors to try and make sure those meetings do run on time and that you do stick to those agendas. And if you say the meeting's going to finish at 8:30, it finishes at 8:30, and that person gets to go home and actually have a bit of rest from school. Being encouraging and acknowledging the head teacher's performance. So the head is obviously there in the school every day, probably doing this for a lot of their teachers. Saying to teachers, well done, great, that was really good, I'm really pleased with this performance. But who's actually doing that to the head teacher? Because are the teachers saying to the head, you did a really good job today, well done, or this is really great? Probably not, because they're focusing on their day-to-day work. So are you as governors actually acknowledging when the head's doing a really good job? Are you in the school, are you seeing the good job they're doing, and actually are you making reference to that? Because those little things I think are really important to people who are there, who are going through that process every single day. It does make a big difference. So again, sort of bear that in mind when you're in and around the school. Actually, if you see good practice, you'll see something good that's happening. Why not? It doesn't take much. Performance management target about their personal well-being. So by doing this and by acknowledging that actually there is a responsibility to ensure the head's got a work-life balance and have their personal well-being. So why not set a target on it? I think that shows that the governing body have bought into the concept of work-life balance and well-being, and actually acknowledging that. So can you build into one of their targets about making sure that they are taking time out to make sure that there's a balance there. And little things like if the head is working on the budget in the afternoon, do they have to do that in the building? Do they have to be in the building? Can they actually go out and do that at home? And their project, if they are doing a project, can they take the time away from the school to do it? It might not be that it's appropriate for whatever reason, it might not be they're able to because of the month or the week we're in, but actually when there are those perhaps bits of downtime and those bits of work that really need a bit of focus, a few hours to get done, actually can we make allowances to allow them to be able to do that work appropriately? Other things that came up within the survey were, do heads need to be at every meeting? Can they delegate responsibilities to their deputies perhaps to attend meetings that maybe they don't need to be at? And a whole host of other things that were in there. So really it's just by considering these things as a governing body, is having the buy-in to the concept of wellbeing that, I think makes a big difference to people that are within those roles. I found this little quote, I think as part of the survey, and I thought it was really interesting, saying that head teachers have a responsibility themselves, and I think employees have a responsibility themselves to kind of manage their work-life balance. But actually, I think head teachers are probably very busy trying to support the work-life balance of all of their staff. Are they taking the time out to consider their own work-life balance? And as governors, you should be challenging them on that, making sure they are taking time, making sure they are looking after themselves, identifying warning signs, looking for concerns, and actually picking them up on it, and making, being a good, caring employer. At the end of the day, we all form part of that employer umbrella. Whether you're the local authority, whether you're the governor, whether you're a trustee, it's really important that you do identify those areas. So have a real good think about that. I'm just sorry, I'm conscious that we're overrunning now. What I have done is put up the links to all the documents I've just referred to. So I think if the presentation can be made available, obviously you don't have to scribble those down, but these are the documents that you can find online. And that is the end of the presentation. If anyone's got any questions afterwards, I'm more than happy to stay around to answer them really quickly. I just don't want to take up any more of your time, so sorry that was this presentation.